Hello and welcome to this week's Property Matters, the show that brings global trends to an Irish audience to help shape your knowledge of the industry. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or by email at hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Your hosts today are Carol Tallon and myself, Bryan Fox.
Oh, thank you, Bryan. Now, I'm looking forward to talking to all of our guests in studio today. But first, let's take a look at some of the big stories of the week. So, the Raise the Roof protest took place in the city this weekend, and it showcased really the anger of people at the prevailing housing crisis and the government's handling of this. Much of the anger has been directed at the emerging co-living sector, which has been described as overpriced student accommodation for millennials. So we might discuss that this afternoon. Also, Dublin experienced the strongest growth in property prices among 32 countries and cities between 2013 and 2018, according to the IMF. Despite such rapid growth, the risk of a repeat of Ireland's boom-bust scenario is seen as unlikely by the IMF. However, this strongly contradicts an OECD warning that the Irish property market is at risk of a new boom-to-bust cycle. It warns that the Irish property market remains vulnerable to rapid changes in prices with the influx of foreign investors, which could create a new source of risk, leaving the market vulnerable to rapid changes in prices and also from the risks associated with funding from outside of the Irish banking sector. So, as fans of smart city initiatives currently being rolled out across Ireland's cities, we welcome the installation of new smart benches in Dún Laoghaire that charge your phones on the go.
Okay, well, it's been an eventful time in the last few weeks in the Dáil, and it's amendments that have been really much to do with the business of the Dáil this week. The first amendment was the Residential Tenancies Bill 2018, which is debated, and as that went through its final stage in the lower house, the effect of the new rules means that it will be more difficult for landlords to evict tenants and enhance the enforcement powers for the Residential Tenancies Board. Once enacted, it will outlaw what is known as renovations. This is where a tenant is forced out because the landlord wants to renovate the property and then offer it to a new tenant at a higher rent. Should a landlord want a tenant to leave the property, they have to have a good reason for them doing so. The change must be substantial and be either a permanent extension which increases the floor by 25% or a combination of other improvements. Should the landlord want a tenant to leave, they must get a certificate from an architect or a surveyor stating that the work could be considered a health and safety risk, and therefore that it needs to be vacated for at least 3 years. The landlord wants a tenant to vacate to substantially refurbish or renovate the property. When the work is completed, it must be offered to the former tenant. And in the event of the landlord wanting to sell the property, there must be a contract for sale within 9 months of the termination date, or else offer it to relet to the former tenant. There was also pressure put on the Minister for Housing, Owen Murphy, to have a rent register in which potential tenants could see what the previous tenant was paying. But the Minister felt that he has to continue to look at the rental sector and make sure all the necessary protections are in place, as we have to have landlords protection also. Another important aspect of the legislation is the RTB will be able to investigate landlords who attempt to engage in non-compliance with rent increase restrictions. And as it happens at 7 p.m. this evening, it's due to be debated in the Seanad, and it's due then to finish its final stages. The housing spokesperson for Fianna Fáil, Darragh O'Brien, has put forward a private members' bill last Thursday called the Property Service Regulation Amendment Management Company Regulation Bill 2018. Now, the aim of this bill is to establish a management owner company ombudsman to be called the Ombudsman for Management Owner Companies. Basically, the function of the ombudsman should be to help management owners with setting up committees which are mainly filled by volunteers. It seems that most committees within houses and apartments aren't run very well and have difficulty informing committees. Another feature of it is to cut the local property tax. The thinking here is that the management fees pay for services within the property development, and as we know, the tax was established to fund services such as maintaining public lighting, roads, grounds keeping, etc. The bill will now be discussed, and it will not be before the Dáil for the next 6 months. And when speaking to Darragh O'Brien, he was quite happy with that as well, because there's other constitutional parts to be looked at, and the Attorney General has to look at it as well. Finally, Sinn Féin last week tabled a bill called the 35th Amendment of the Constitution, and in brackets Right to a Home Bill 2016. They had a private members' bill before the Dáil called I mentioned that. Essentially, their party spokesman on housing, Owen O'Brien, wants to provide a referendum so that the state recognise the right of all citizens to adequate, appropriate, secure, safe and affordable housing. And in a lengthy reply to this proposal, Minister David Staunton, who was representing Minister Owen Murphy, said that the absence of a right to housing in the Constitution has never prevented the government from actively seeking to provide housing for those in need, and the provision of social housing has been taking place since the foundation of the state. However, this has always been done with appropriate consideration for the other needs of citizens, which must be factored into any allocation of scarce resources. There were other contributions from members of other parties with the Dáil, but within a couple of hours the bill was voted down. And that's it for this week. They were all very interesting pieces that you had there, Carol. But as for now, our first guest up today is Joanne Lavelle, Director of Michael Lavelle Estate Agents, and Damien Ward, Managing Director of MMWARD Estate Agents and Property Consultants. So Damien and Joanne, very good to see you.
Thank you, Bryan.
I'm so delighted listening to the political piece today, Bryan, that we have two estate agents with us today. I have to get your reaction to some of that. Some of the political proposals there. I mean, actually, I think that's probably the first time that I've heard landlord protection actually being included, because I genuinely thought that was something that has been completely railroaded and forgotten over the past number of years, simply because it doesn't appear to be politically popular. So what do you make of the changes proposed in terms of the properties to get a tenant to vacate? It was always very vague that substantial work was going to be done. Now that's going to be made less vague, which is welcome. But to have an architect sign off that the property can't be in use for a number of years, and after that period of time to go back to the original tenant to give them right of first refusal, does that even make sense?
Well, in my opinion, the bar is set very high in terms of what the landlord is going to be required to do to be compliant. I also think that practicality is going to have a big catch up on its hands to catch up with the policy, because it came up today in CPD actually with IPAV and the regulator in relation to how can, if you're letting a property, how can you check if it's in a rent control zone what the outgoing rent was. So there's no proper provision for that information, so register for that is probably the ideal solution. But certainly in terms of refurbishments and so on, the bar is set very high, and it is another example of where the cost to continue performing as a landlord is going to become increasingly prohibitive, which we're probably going to talk about it later on in the sales section, but it's an ongoing problem for landlords. 70% of the landlords in Ireland in the private rental sector are one-off landlords. They don't have a lot of money to spend on improvements, so there's a practicality versus policy gap here.
Mm-hmm. So the impression I'm getting from you then is that you're not too happy with what the contents of the bill are in relation to what you've discussed, obviously.
Well, I'm happy that it continues to support tenant rights. I'm happy also that it actually, as you say, Carol, talks a little bit, almost, is a new topic in terms of landlord entitlements and rights.
But the balance isn't right.
The balance isn't right. The balance isn't right, and I think that some of the concepts are a little bit too deep reaching in terms of what's going to be deliverable.
Yeah, Damien, you're operating in Naas and the wider Kildare area. So, what are you seeing in terms of are private landlords leaving the market, or how is the market down in Kildare?
There's a bit of an exodus, all right, of private landlords. For that same reason, is that a lot of them are accidental landlords, and they didn't get into this situation when they bought, and at the peak, and now obviously it's only now they're kind of coming around and breaking even. So, there would be, I would find at the moment there seems to be a lot of landlords just are fed up with it really, and it's all in favour of the tenants. It's probably a regular occurrence that you get landlords now. Well, I suppose in another way it's good for our business because we're getting the sale of a property, but and the flip side of that is that landlords have just had enough really, because it's all in favour of the tenant, and you can see again that what's coming down the tracks is always in favour of the tenant as well. Yeah,
and see the difficulty about losing the one-off private landlords from the market is once a gap opens up, the market will step in to fill that. So what's the market going to fill it with? Is it going to fill it with more institutional investors? And the reality is the institutional investors don't want to be in every town in Ireland. They don't want to deal with small developments. They don't want to deal with low value rents. So actually are we creating a gap that it might be more unpredictable how it's going to be filled?
Well, in my experience, so we would be losing probably about one landlord a month where they're exiting the market and disposing of the asset. And I won't say half of those sales are... I think it will increasingly become half where the small institutional investment occurs. So a pension somebody will purchase that asset through a pension, and that's critical. Some people aren't so much in favour of people purchasing property through pensions, but it's a critical part of the market. And in Dundalk, for example, we have a good amount of FDI, employment generated activity in Dundalk, foreign direct investment. So you're talking about your PayPals, National Pens. There's a big pharmaceutical plant being built at the moment, Wuji Biologics. Those people need places to live. They're not necessarily buyers, they're renters. The interesting thing, and I suppose it moves on a little bit to selling and development, is, if you think that there's three key ways that houses are being supplied, it's through the build to rent schemes, the social housing schemes, and the open market purchases, the private builds. In places like Dundalk, we don't really have the build to rent, because that's a city phenomenon. It's not so much a regional phenomenon, certainly not outside of the main cities. So in Dundalk, for example, we would have a lot of social housing and a lot of private housing builds. Okay, so when the social houses, when people are taken off, if they're in private rental situations and they're HAP recipients, and they're moved over to the social housing, and that's in line with government policy, and that's important, and it gives them strength and security of tenure. But what's happening is, as you correctly said, the landlord is taking the opportunity. Maybe they've been renting for a long time, they've been using the asset for a long time, it's reached positive or neutral equity, and they exit the market. So it's creating a gap. So it's one in, one out. It's going to take a while for the market to stabilise. For that.
Do you see that snowballing? Do you see a big sell-off in terms of property?
Well, as I say, at the moment, I'm just seeing it on a steady level. A steady level. But as the social housing supply ramps up, more tenants will move into that scenario, into the social housing scenario,
and move away from private renting.
Yes,
and which, as a state, we need. We need people to be moving in that direction. Yeah. Is there an upside to this? Are we opening up opportunities for first-time buyers, perhaps?
Yes, we are. I mean, when I think of Dundalk, for example, first-time buyers will see good value in Dundalk. Now, we're coming close to the end of the Help to Buy scheme. So, in a few months, it's sort of probably not going to be something that we're going to be talking about anymore. But when you think about, for example, you can buy a new bedroom, 3-bedroom house in Dundalk for 250,000, 260,000. You can buy a second-hand 3-bedroom house for 200,000. So there's very good value there. And as the landlords exit the market, yes, it's an opportunity for first-time buyers, second-hand buyers, anybody.
And I'm sure Dundalk would be considered commuter belt as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're only an hour from Dublin and an hour from Belfast.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then we slightly have the Brexit thing. I mean, I don't know if it's the elephant in the room or not, because nobody really knows what the situation is. And I know that the OECD, I think, had a report last month about the effect that that's going to have, and it is going to affect the property market down as south as Cork. But it's not a thing that's destabilising our market. Our market is good.
And is there a market variance between, say, north of the border, like Newry, that type of location, in comparison to Monaghan and the south of the border?
Well, north of the border, ironically, it's maybe 5 kilometres from my front door, and I don't really have a grasp of its property market. Okay. Although I will say that the values are way softer. Okay, and that's a lot to do with incomes and so on.
So what areas are you and your firm operating in at the moment, Joanne?
So in counties Louth and Monaghan and North Meath.
That's a huge catchment area.
It is quite a big catchment area. It's a heavily populated area. So
you must be seeing quite a spread. I'd imagine it's not one trend. So, for example, in Monaghan, I would imagine the property market there is quite different, say, than it might be in Drogheda or Dundalk.
Yes, it is. I mean, even Drogheda and Dundalk, they have their individual little quibbles, what I mean? It's very different. I suppose really all of the markets are kind of adjusting with the housing stock coming in. Monaghan, absolutely, it's a very Monaghan, Carrickmacross, they're different to Dundalk, but they're steady, stable markets, and people are increasingly opting to live there, where they can buy a bigger or a more affordable house than in Dublin.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd imagine, Damien, that's a trend you're seeing in Kildare.
Yeah, well, Naas is definitely obviously a commuter town, there's no doubt about that.
But it's always been one of the most expensive commuter towns. So I don't know how high it is on the list of, say, affordability. So I think Naas has always had traditionally a lot to offer in terms of facilities and an easier commute. So it has a lot going for it other than affordability. But maybe affordability isn't as great as it might be. What are our average prices at the moment?
It would depend, you're right. I suppose in years gone by, Naas didn't actually, during the boom, it never actually did get much billing going on. There was an issue there with the services, so that's one of the reasons that it was always very expensive. But now it's kind of gone to the opposite. There's now a mass supply of new homes in Naas. So you will see the prices. I have already seen in recent, even the last maybe 2 or 3 months, that prices have started to soften a little bit and have come back a little bit.
Really?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Is that the impact of all the new homes? Because it's a 3-4 brand new developments just after launching.
You're right.
in
Yeah,
Naas.
exactly. Yeah, 5
and
actually.
High-end,
fabulous.
fabulous.
All high end. Exactly, all high end. So
and that new motorway too. That's been
exactly. Yeah. So that's
surely
the big issue was the infrastructure really.
Right.
But now that has been sorted out. It's work in progress as we speak.
Yeah.
Which will obviously add to it, but it is a very affluent area. Naas would be a very affluent area. There's no doubt.
And where would they be coming from to come to Naas?
It's all over. Even Monaghan, Cavan, even from areas like that are actually working in Dublin, and it's affordable. So you have it from all over the country. Yeah. Then you'd have obviously people that are moving out. They're just priced out. It's the same old story. They've always been priced out of the Dublin market, so they're now moving out to Naas. All right, Jen.
I'm genuinely surprised because I live quite close to Naas, and actually I've been really surprised at the high quality of the new developments that's open. And I certainly don't want to be giving one developer a plug over another, but I had an experience there just over Christmas. I spoke to a first-time buyer who had been looking for about 2 years, and she was somebody employed by a tech firm. So she was well set up to be a first time buyer and could have purchased an apartment in Dublin, and she was out visiting a friend in a new development near the college out in out near the Kilshee Hotel, and I think it was a Ballymore development, and she visited her friend, took a walk around the showroom, fell in love with the property. And as somebody who worked as a buyer's agent for nearly a decade, I always say it's a terrible thing to do, to fall in love with the property not knowing the area. It should be the absolute opposite. But no, she fell in love with the development, and then she got to know Naas, fell in love with Naas, and then realised there was so many of her generation and of her colleagues and past colleagues had bought in the area. So she actually purchased a house that she hadn't been looking for at all after 2 years of house hunting in Dublin, moved into Naas just before Christmas, and when I was chatting to her over Christmas, she said it was the best thing she ever did. The quality of life, the easy commute, she has the option of working from home sometimes. So it's amazing. Sometimes as property people, we don't necessarily, it mightn't make sense to us what drives some first time buyers, and sometimes they just want the home that is beautifully presented and it fits their lifestyle and it fits their budget, and so it can be really surprising, and Naas seems to offer that, and of course within the easy commute of Dublin. So what's the most active sector of the market in Naas at the moment?
Well, obviously the new homes is flying, that's obviously, but you also again now it is a bit for an affordability. You have about, there were probably 290, your standard 3-bedroom semi was 290, 295, has come back to probably 270, 275 now in the last 2 months, and I have 2 cases of 2 properties selling in 2 different estates that have they've been 20,000 less, they've sold 20,000 less in the last 2 months.
Are they new builds?
They're second hand, yeah.
Now, is it the flood of new properties to the market, is that putting pressure on the second hand market?
Well, you have that as well. I think in general there seems to be a lot more supply, even on the second. I don't know if you're finding it as well, but I've taken on more properties in the last 2 months than I did in probably the previous 6 months.
Wow, okay.
And I think that's right across the board. That's not just with me with our agency. I think it's right across the board. So there seems to be a bit more supply. It could be a combination of landlords as well, like we already spoke about, just releasing, just have had enough of this and just releasing their 3-bed semis as well. So you have kind of a combination of landlords releasing properties, and then maybe people just saying that the properties have maxed out, that they've reached their peak level here at this stage, so they're looking to release a bit of equity as well.
And what is the rental market in Naas like at the moment?
Still very strong, still crazy, yeah. Still like a 2-bed apartment in Naas.
Is there more demand than supply?
Yeah, you're going to have, if you've got a 2-bedroom apartment, you're going to have queues up outside the door. It's terrible.
To buy or
to rent.
Yeah.
And you'll be looking, you could like €1,200 for a very bog standard 2-bedroom apartment in Naas. Like that's what kind of rent. So the rent is quite crazy. All right.
I'm just curious. I mean, 2 estate agents here at the moment, and you both seem very disheartened about what you've heard there in relation to the tenancies bill. Is there much consultation with the ministry in terms of your own misgivings about what's going on in the market at the moment in relation to relation to tenants and so forth?
Well, not that I'm aware of. I think it's mostly led through, for example, the RTB, the Residential Tenancies Board, and Threshold, and various organisations like that, which do a very important job, and that's, they have a very important role in trying to ensure rights for everybody. But I don't know that the policy leaders necessarily consult with landlords. It's a difficult thing, but for sure the big challenges for landlords are the taxation and the building regulations. It's just become too prohibitive. And as you correctly said, some landlords have been sitting in negative equity and topping up their mortgage obligations in their rental, and then in the last few years it's been the reverse. And I suppose they're now coming to a point where they can move on.
But okay, like we've talked about how the build to rent hasn't really become a regional phenomenon, and maybe it won't. So what happens in the regional areas when private landlords exit the market? What's that doing to the rental market?
Well, in some cases, like for example, I would have managed a particular property for a long time, for many years. The tenant moved into a new publicly built house, and the landlord opted to sell the asset, but it was bought by a pension fund, by somebody buying into their pension. So it will still be
made available to the rental market.
That will stay within that circulation. But I would say that we are going to see a gradual attrition of that, because if something comes on the market, it's a 50-50 chance whether it's going to be bought by an owner-occupier or by an investor, and those properties, they're still within an affordability level for the investment, that the yield is still adequate enough that it's viable, but we are, I think, going to see a bit of attrition. So what's the answer to that? I don't know. I don't see build to rent coming around the corner in Dundalk anytime soon. But
first-time buyers in Dundalk have a competitor wearing a different hat, if you like, because social housing, I think Louth County Council have been one of the most active in delivery of social housing units. Pro rata, I think they're among the top in the country, and I know that a lot of that is partnering with approved housing bodies. Yes,
that's a very strong area. They've also been very progressive, in fairness to them, in bringing dilapidated property back into stock, so CPOing property. They were the first county council that did it, CPO'd old property, because
we're still very slow in Dublin in relation to that.
That's all a critical part of building.
That's
of getting a stable
initiative.
Property market. I would say in relation to the rentals in Dundalk, we're at a stable level now. We've had a very strong rate of growth in the last 2 years, and now it's steady. But we'll still see some weeks we'll have a peak demands where we put something on the market.
What is the average rent for, say, a 2-bed apartment or a 3-bed house?
A 2-bed apartment would be, €1,000.
Okay.
Yeah, and a three bedroom house to rent will be €1,100-1,200 depending. So that's putting it above the cost of a mortgage. But then you get into the difficulty of not everybody being able to
Damien,
apply.
put to you what Karen's just asked. What's the social housing situation now in the Kildare areas, and much supply in relation to down there?
There's not. It's we deal with the county council, and they're always out actively looking. There's a huge shortage of social housing, to be honest with you.
Is that because of property prices down there, or not availability of land?
Land, I think, to be honest with you. I think it's more sort of land. And I don't know whether. I think that's the main issue. Is just the land. I think is the big issue. Yeah.
Sorry, Bryan. Is part of that because Kildare was seen as so attractive for developers that it was maybe one of the areas that there was certainly a perception that there was large potential landlords. They were holding on to land banks there until such time as development became viable.
I'm not 100% sure now. Really, I suppose it could be. Maybe I'm not 100% sure, to be honest with you, Carl.
The delivery of social housing in lots of towns, some local authorities just seem to have picked up the ball and run with it. They're very good at doing it, like Louth County Council. And then there's others. I think maybe Kildare just doesn't have. I don't know, is it the same, a jigsaw with all of these pieces, and they just don't seem to be putting the pieces together and working with the approved housing bodies.
It is prime farming land down there though as well, isn't it? And you've got Goffs down there, and so I'd imagine.
Yeah, but that's a zoning issue. Do you know what I mean? There's no new zoning coming on. I think Wicklow is also quite busy in terms of housing associations, but it is a zoning thing, and services, because that was one of the difficulties that NACE, as you say, was having with regard to infrastructure. But I know if I'm selling a piece of development land, which I did recently, there's a clamour for it because it's scarce service land that's zoned and everything, and ready to go for planning permission. And I'll see split down the middle 50-50 between a guy who's going to build for open market sale and a guy who's going to build on contract for a housing association. So it's a balance.
Right.
And it's in a good way.
Yeah, well, look, that's what we need. We need all sectors moving.
Exactly.
So, Damien, what are your prospects for the NACE market now over the next year?
I think it's good. I think it's still going to be strong, all right, I do think prices have softened and it's probably stabilised, and it's no bad thing. I think in general the overview, the market will come back a little bit, but I do think there's a huge demand there, and it's still, as I said already, it's a good area. It's a very strong area. So I do think that the future is good and it is bright for NACE, although prices will come back slightly, I think.
any advice for people who might be thinking of selling their home over the next 12 months?
Any advice would be, it's the $1 million question, isn't it? Who has the crystal ball? I think personally that is my own feeling, is that I think we are probably kind of peaking, or we have probably peaked. I don't know whether there's a huge amount more in it by sitting on it. I think that going to the market now, but again, I don't like saying these kind of things,
of
because
course.
you don't want to be.
Do you see a slowdown coming, do you?
No, I don't think it's slowdown, but just a slight readjustment.
Stabilising.
Recalibrating.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That seems to be a national trend.
It's a stabilising.
And for you, Joanne, what are your...
The same, although, we've had a fairly busy new homes market, more so in the 3 and 4 bed semi sort of standard stock area in Dundalk recently, and I suppose really what will dampen or will change that will be government policy moving forward.
Well, that seems to be the big thing at the moment. That was Joanne Lavelle, Director of Michael Lavelle Estate Agents, and Damien Ward, Managing Director of MMWARD Estate Agents and Property Consultants. Very interesting piece to kick the programme off with. Thank you, Joanne and Damien, for coming in. Stay tuned, because after the break, with us in the studio, we'll have Emma Hayes, Head of New Media and PR for Property District.
Your community radio for South Dublin. This is Dublin South FM.
And you're very welcome back to this week's episode of Property Matters here in Dublin South FM with Carol, Tallon and myself, Bryan Fox. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. As mentioned before the break, our next guest today is Emma Hayes. She's Head of New Media and PR for Property District. Emma, thanks. Good to see you again.
Hello, how are you?
Good, I'm good, and I hope you're keeping well as well.
Very well.
What is new media? Tell us.
New media.
Yes.
New media is all about video, audio, content that's is distributed through computers and everything like that. So it is all about how you use the new technologies and forward them out to people. And
I'm guessing that's quite useful in the property market now.
It is definitely useful. We're using it a lot in terms of like video and infographics and everything. In Property District now we have an in-house team that can provide like virtual reality and augmented reality and everything. So we're very much paying attention to the changes, and me as Head of Media has to kind of overlook everything and make sure that we're kind of staying ahead of competitors.
How familiar are people that are looking for property? How are they up to speed with these new developments?
I think people that are looking for property, if you're talking about people that want to buy property, I think most of them, we're dealing with an on-demand kind of customer now. Estate agents can't, the old style brochure is not good enough anymore. It's just not good enough because people are very much digitally inclined now, and that's the way it's going. So
would that be under a certain age group, I'm sure?
Yeah, it is, but also I think older people are turning towards technology now, and like most older people, the demographic, they're all on Facebook, a lot of them are anyway, and social media is a huge part of that. So what we're finding now with estate agents is if you just even have just a website, that's not actually good enough. You actually have to make sure you have the right user experience, you have to make sure it's mobile friendly, and you have to make sure it's being updated with regular content that is valuable to them and providing good solutions to the customer's problem, the client's problem. So their problems are they may not know an area that they're coming to live in, they might not know the coffee shops, they might not know the restaurants, and that's where we come in to kind of deliver that kind of good rapport with their estate agent and how to create.
And you're working with the estate agent then?
Yeah, of course. So we would look at the estate agent, look at their brand, their business and everything, and what we do is then we kind of make a whole strategy around their business and how we can amplify that out to the people, and basically look at their story and how we can make it good for the customer. So for example, if we had an estate agent in a town, we would look at how we can project that. So we would look at their
what is the attitude, say, from provincial estate agents to these new ideas for marketing property?
I think most of them are happy enough to change. I think it's important that they do. I think, yeah, there can be some reservations on it, but once you sit them down and you actually like show them, and it is about showing them how things can improve with our help, well then they really do come on board with that. It's very important for them to come on board, because like I said, the old style brochure is not going to...
Yeah, but I don't want to sound ageist here, but the older type of managed estate agents is slower to adapt to change, or is it the newer set that's coming up?
I think some of them might have reservations, but I don't think a lot of them do. No.
Emma, you've been very generous letting him away with that incredibly ageist remark. Yes, Bryan, that is entirely ageist. In fact, one of the things I always say about innovation, if you're innovative at 19, you're going to be innovative at 90. That's it. So
Yeah,
actually,
true.
embracing change, readiness to innovate, that's a mindset. It's absolutely not an age. And in fact, one of the things we've seen more than anything is that some of the estate agents, particularly the second generation estate agents that have been around for a long time, they know better. They've seen change before. They know it's all cyclical. And I think one of the amazing things that Emma touched on there was user experience. That's new to us now because we never called things user experience. But actually, if you went back 30, 40 decades ago before technology, if you were moving to a new area, who would you go see? You'd go see the local estate agent. So they actually were the people who were responsible for user experience. We just didn't call it that. But that's the person who would show you around town, put you into their car, drive you around, bring you into the pub at lunchtime, introduce you to the man behind the bar, tell you where the best place to get a sandwich is. So actually, estate agents in any given town were the masters of the user experience, and it just kind of slipped away. I don't know, did they forget it? Was it replaced by digital brochures or brochures or something? And actually, in a way, new technology is giving the estate agents a way to go back to what they were really good at. Technology can replace a lot, but what the estate agents do in a local town, their special thing is their knowledge. It's the fact that they're part of the community. So
community building and everything. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to be ageist again because I do remember a time when it was the popular thing was for a house to be sold by auction through an estate agent.
Yeah.
Is that still very much in vogue at the moment, or has technology replaced that idea as well?
Well, there's online bidding now, and there's all online kind of auctioning as well. To be honest, I don't think auctioning is as big as what it used to be. Maybe you would. I don't think it is. To be honest,
I agree with you. I agree with you. It's not, and in fact, what we're
is
seeing.
Is that a good thing? Do you think, or is it?
No. Well, actually, it depends.
It's a time saving thing.
Auction is a strategic tool for selling that estate agents use for a particular property. So if they have a property that they feel that there'll be high demand for, there are many reasons why they might adopt bidding. And in fact, one of the things we saw since 2011 is the rise of online bidding platforms, and that allowed companies like BidX1 or formerly Alsop, it allowed them to auction 200 properties in 24 hours. They're moving a lot of property, tens of millions worth of property in a very short space of time.
But they're doing it online, so we're still using, that's still new media if you want to go backwards.
Well, that's all to do with auctioneering. Storytelling, I believe, is a very important part of your business.
Yeah, well, it definitely is. For me, it's all about the story. For me, I'm very much interested in an estate agent story, and
that's
who
your
they
writing
are.
Background.
Exactly.
Emma is a writer and novelist.
So for me, it's all about the story. So I love going into a new estate agent.
How long it's been established?
Exactly.
How long it's been there?
Who are you? And just getting to know them as well, because everyone has different little ticks, and some people would want a more corporate style, and some people are more, actually, I want to be a little different and less corporate. And it's really getting to know their brand. And for me, it's all about trying to find that good story within them and making it unique. So we look at all different things, like the property story, as in how we can sell the property. So you have a property that looks great.
Are you saying individual properties have their own story as well?
I think so.
Yeah.
I actually think so. If I look after property brochures, and I have done for people, I will look at every technical detail and look room to room and try and get a good feel for the property, so that I can sell a property. And sometimes some properties are easier than others, because obviously there's ones that are empty and it's a shell, but then you've got to try and look at the logistics of it. Where's the location? What is in the surroundings of it? What is the potential? Customers need to, your clients, when you're selling property, they want to know how their life is going to fit into that house. So they really want to feel at home. So you can only do that through storytelling. And when we say about storytelling as well, through community stories, through local stories, all that kind of stuff, basically we're positioning the estate agent as an expert in their area without you even realising. And estate agents will always say, well, why am I writing a blog? Why is this blog about this? Well, we're writing it, but for them. But they're saying, why am I doing this? Well, it's quite simple. Storytelling is an old style of connecting with people and emotions. People won't remember an estate agent, but they will remember.
How much time would you expect to spend with an estate agent to form a story for them?
Not very long, and it depends, because you get to know them over a few phone calls or going in house to them. It's not too difficult, because I think instantly when I meet someone, I will know exactly where they want to go with their brand and how they want to project their brand. But also it takes trust. They have to trust me, because if they don't trust me, how am I supposed to do my job well? I can only do it if you trust me enough to actually know what's good for your business, and also to adopt your kind of branding and your style.
So in a way, it's like a type of journalism. You're building a story based on trust.
Oh, definitely, of course. It definitely is. And you have to use those skills in this, down to the property stories, down to your blog, infographics, down to even getting them into speaking engagements or getting them on the radio. They all need to have a story, because people will not connect with you unless it's a story.
What stories would you tell, normally speaking?
Well, for some estate agents, we go backwards. We look at the restaurants in the area so we can connect with the people that are moving to the area. Other things is like reasons why you want to live in a certain area. So reasons to live in, say, it could be anywhere like Kildare town or wherever. So we would do that. So then people are kind of looking at it, getting to know the area and stuff. And then what happens is you build this lovely community feel. So in instances of that, when we create this community feel for a client, well, then you have people that are doing clubs, groups and all sorts of things in the town contacting the estate agent saying, can you put us on your list of services in the area and stuff. So basically people are remembering you because of those stories, and because, you know, it's not just about the call to action and the selling the property. People want a lot more now, and you need to keep them on your website. So when we go back to the website and the new media user experience, clicking at a house, we also want them to look at blogs, we want them to look at the testimonials, and you need to keep them on your website longer. So you can do that by storytelling, whereas if you only have the call to action of this for sale house, how creative is that? It's not very creative. So if you do want a creative mindset, please do call us, because, you know, we'll bring it to your business.
And I suppose now with the construction industry the way it is today, with the amount of unavailability and so forth of property, competition must be quite intense now between estate agents in terms of attracting clients and advising clients as to where to go and what the best property locations are.
And that's where we come in to really position them as the expert in their area, and it is giving them that heads up, because other estate agents, if you look at your competitors in your town, which I'd say to any estate agent, look at the websites, look at what they're doing. Well, most of them are probably not blogging regularly. Most of them are not doing infographics. Most of them probably aren't going online. They're probably not doing PR where they're in the news or anything like that. And we can actually provide all those kind of services through PR and everything else. So there's lots of things we can do.
You mentioned something interesting there, and I suppose, you know, maybe it's something that people wouldn't think about, but it's not just about promoting, it's not just about any one business or any one agency promoting itself. You're actually showcasing an area. You're making an area attractive. But you're also showcasing other businesses in the town.
Yeah.
You know,
it's a community building.
Yeah.
So that means that when you like do a piece on, say, restaurants in the town, that
Indeed.
restaurant's going to throw it out to their social media. They're going to say thanks very much to the estate agent, and they're probably going to come and use you when they need to sell a house, or when they hear something, they'll be like, oh, well, actually this guy is good. So it's a much bigger picture than just throwing out a blog. There is a very simple strategy to it, but it does need to be executed well.
And I'm sure the client is probably very much, well, I would be anyway, personally speaking, attracted to that type of story.
Yeah, no, I think it really works well, and it's not me just saying it. I actually believe that by doing that, you create a really good rapport with your clients. And
tell me, just as a matter of interest, with that type of work involved, do you think then that the estate agent needs to cut back then on advertising once they have this sort of medium of the blog and the story and so forth?
I wouldn't say so now. I think with us, when we come in, we offer a very good tool, as in that, and it's out of their house as well as such. So realistically, we're coming in with a new fresh mindset and everything. So yes, maybe they wouldn't want to advertise, but not all estate agents advertise their properties anyway at this moment. But through the social media, through the storytelling, through the PR, all the services that we go, they're getting all the benefits.
I suppose it's all complimentary, really.
Which is kind of like advertising, but we're doing it in a very a less obvious way, I suppose, because we're showcasing them, we're showcasing the community, which is exactly what they need.
You see, you have to remember as well, one of the things that I'm so aware of, and I think obviously the tragedy in Grenfell, the Grenfell Tower in London as well, really brings it home. People aren't content just to know kind of what's being built in their area. You know, like we've talked about for estate agents, but for property developers, and even more particularly for, say, contractors, people want to know what's being built, who's building it, and what materials they're using.
Yeah,
this is stuff that, a decade ago people weren't asking. It was just what's going up. Yeah, great, fire it up. You know, people are so concerned that about what's the safety record of this developer, what's the safety record of this contractor. You know, how, in terms of the multi-unit developments, and management companies, how well do they manage? How well do they manage the handover of this development when they're finished? Do they leave, and are people satisfied with it? So reputation has never been more important, and it all comes back to trust. So any business that's serious about creating trust for their clients, they're serious about their reputation.
Okay.
Yep.
That was Emma Hayes, Head of New Media and PR for Property District. Thanks again for coming
Thank
in.
you.
Emma, it's good to see you. We'll be back shortly with more news.
Everything's fine on 93.9 Dublin South FM.
And you're very welcome back to Property Matters here in Dublin South FM with Carol Tallon and myself, Bryan Fox. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. As mentioned before the break, in the studio with us right now is Natalie Ryan. She's Business Development Coordinator of CPAS, and Susan O'Mara, Financial Service Consultant at Milestone Advisory. Not only Susan, we're very good to see you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The pension construction industry, how is it doing nowadays with the dark days, are the gloomy days gone, do you think?
Well, I suppose our schemes are run for the people working in the sector. So we've got two very large schemes with about 1.5 billion under management for the construction workers and about $500 million for construction executives, and both of those schemes, I mean, they're not reliant on the sector, but obviously they do very well when the sector is doing very well, and there's obviously some growth in the sector for the last number of years. So yeah, there's definitely positivity there.
Good. And yourself, how are you seeing things at the moment, Susan?
Natalie.
Sorry, Natalie, excuse me, sorry.
Yeah, well, I've been working in the scheme there for over 10 years, and the last couple of years it's definitely picked up, and I've learned so much more the last couple of years. I'm out on the road a lot more as well, and like that construction is booming at the moment as well, so it's a great time to be working in the construction industry.
But when the industry is busier, is that the right time to speak to people about pensions? Is that the right time, or what is the attitude?
I think the attitude, as far as we're concerned, is make hay while the sun shines. I mean, essentially, while people are employed and earning, and there's bonuses and things like that, that's when it's very much time to be considering your sort of retirement funding, and that's what we're trying to do on a continuous basis. And there's a lot of reasons for it, not outside of construction, but just in terms of the overall landscape in the country,
Okay, and Natalie, you're obviously out on the road. So what regions do you work in?
Well, there's a few of us out on the road there. We'd be covering the whole country. We have Safe Pass training, so we can go out on site and we can meet with companies, we can meet with employees directly as well, and just go through the benefits of being part of our scheme. We can go through the sick pay that they're covered for, the death and service, go through retirement planning, and emphasise the tax relief that they can get on it as well, because a lot of people aren't aware of the tax relief around the pension savings.
And is that applicable for the employer companies or for the employees?
Both. The employer can get tax relief on it, and then the employees can get tax relief on it then as well.
Okay, so how does that work, say, in terms of on a construction site, because you've got so many people who are subcontractors, the employee subcontractor divide, I think in this particular industry can be the most difficult.
I suppose when it comes to that, the pension schemes don't have any ability to step in there. So essentially, if you're deemed an employee, you're either in either the mandatory pension scheme, or you might be in an executive level pension scheme, and if you're self-employed, you do your own thing. So the both of the schemes that we look after are for employees. For self-employed, you might use a different type of pension product. That's the same across the board, whether it's construction or not.
And what's the typical attitude of an employee now when you approach them, or they approach you in relation to looking to invest with you, or looking?
Well, I suppose, very much very, very, very individual situations. For a lot of employees, it's a sort of I suppose they're not really thinking about it, and it's like they'll never retire.
Yeah.
And I suppose one of our biggest jobs is getting them to engage in the fact that at some point in time they will retire.
Yeah.
From my side of the company, I kind of tend to deal with people when they have gotten to retirement age and they have some money. So I'm talking to them about their post-retirement plans and whether they're going to buy an annuity or whether they're going to invest in an approved retirement fund and how that investment is going to work.
But there's an element of trust there as well, because I'm sure you have to there's an element of education as well in relation to what they're entering into with you, and all the stories of the past as well, and the mistrust that's there in relation to it. Susan, would you agree?
So essentially, I suppose what you're talking about there is sort of pensions
Yeah.
specifically, really, is it?
Yeah. Yeah, specifically, yeah.
Well, if we were to get specific, if you were speaking to employees about choosing an ARF rather than an annuity at retirement, like, how do you break that down for people? Because pensions are a very inaccessible topic for almost everybody, unless you're in the area and you're expert in it. So, I mean, how do you break it down in terms of laying forward the choices in a non-biased way?
Okay, so there's a big level of individual decision when it comes to which you go to, and you're looking at a client's attitude to investment risk. Obviously, with the annuity, you are securing a level of income for the rest of your life and you don't have to worry about it, but it's not necessarily great value for money depending on when you're retiring. And with the approved retirement fund, you have to be comfortable with a certain level of investment market risk, whether you're investing in equities or property or what have you. So it's very much comes down to an individual basis.
Would it depend on the age the person retires?
Well, the earlier you retire, the less likely you are to buy an annuity, because the annuity rates are struck based on your longevity. So if you're young, if you're retiring at 50, that income has got to stretch out across to an expectancy of, I suppose, late into your 80s, into your early 90s. So the earlier you retire, the more likely you are to go the approved retirement fund. The other thing with the approved retirement fund is that you can buy an annuity later on down the line, so you're not locked into one decision or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so I suppose this is something that has to fit not just with age and expectations, but also kind of lifestyle strategies. And so how do you take people through that?
Well, a lot of pension schemes, and not just our own, but they would operate lifestyle strategies whereby a lot of people, when they're saving for their retirement, they're very disengaged. There's a lot of inertia, so they're not making active investment choices. So if you're buying an annuity, and what happened in 2008 with the financial crisis happens, you could have a much reduced pot to buy your annuity with. So there's a lot of lifestyling strategies which allow for automatically reducing your investment market risk as you approach retirement, maybe in the last 5 or 10 years. But there's strategies for ARF investors and there's strategies for annuity investors. So it's very much a matter of getting to people before they're not at the retirement age and then making a decision. It's sort of in the run up to it.
And I would imagine that's where your challenge comes in, Natalie. You're responsible for engaging people in this future planning, or even getting them to the table for this future planning.
And that's part of what we're trying to do. We want to have member engagement. We want to have people thinking about it. We want people to, save as much as they can while they're working.
How do you do that with people when we're still hurting somewhat over, after the past decade and after the last crash? How do you get that into people's psyche that, look, this is now the time to do this?
Well, I suppose we emphasise the tax relief that people have on it. With the schemes, they have an employer contribution going in as well. So it's not just the employee portion that's going in, they have an employer portion going in as well. And we just try and make sure that people are looking for pensions as part of their package when they're looking for a new job, to make sure that it's something that they're thinking about more and looking for more, instead of just looking for X amount of salary, that they're looking for these extra benefits.
We also would look at...
That's an interesting one.
And we'd also look at education. I mean, the demographic of the country is changing. So you've got a situation where we've got an ageing population and a potentially unsustainable level of state pension. So currently, this year, the state pension is 12,911 per annum. And 60% of private sector workers have no pension. So you've got to look at a situation where you've got high rents or mortgages that are going to go past state pension age. State pension age isn't kicking in till age 68 if you're retiring from 2028 onwards. So what we try and do is kind of explain in a non-frightening way that it's not really an option anymore. The state isn't going to be the main bedrock of your pension, particularly if you're in your 20s, 30s or 40s. Maybe if you're in your 50s and 60s, you can still rely on that as the bedrock of your pension, but it's not anymore. So it's an element of encouraging people to take a bit of personal sort of responsibility.
And as you say, in a non-scary way, but actually this is quite a frightening prospect, and not just for people in the construction industry, but where does the construction industry compare? How does the construction industry compare with other sectors or other industries?
I suppose because with construction, it's such a physically demanding job, depending on what exactly you do on a daily basis. And obviously with technology getting better every day, sometimes it is less physically demanding, but with construction they might not be able to work until 60, 65, 67,
of
68.
course, and that's a global trend we're seeing, one that's really contributing to the global labour crisis that's ongoing in the construction industry. But in terms of pensions, I think you mentioned there that 60% of the population don't have pensions.
Of the private sector.
Of the private sector don't have
Yeah.
pensions. So how does that relate, say, in the construction industry? Is that above or below 60, or do we know?
The last statistic we have was the CSO Household Survey Q4 2015. So it's a long time ago now, and we'll hopefully have another one soon. And that was 50% nationally and 34% in construction. But that covers the whole base, not just construction workers, but could cover engineers.
So how portable then would a pension be? I mean, if you decide to move from construction, say, into retail or whatever.
Pensions are very portable nowadays. Virtually all pensions are portable. If you're in a defined contribution scheme, you can bring it around with you. You might not.
So
that might not be the best advice, because
yeah.
you can phase your retirement if you've got each of your different pieces of service in different areas. But absolutely, pensions are virtually 100% portable.
So is that important, say, for the auto-enrolment regime?
Auto-enrolment, auto-enrolment at the moment, they did it last year, they had a straw man proposal, and that's kind of been pulled apart at consultation stage. We don't know what it's going to look like in reality, but I suppose the model will be that you'll have an identification number, and no matter where you work, it's going into an account in your name, and that's probably the likeliest way that it's going to work. What's not clear is how auto-enrolment is going to work with the current pension sector, so that'll be interesting to see.
Where does Ireland fit in the international scale, like if we're comparing?
In terms of coverage, well, we are far behind the likes of New Zealand and Australia, because they had the sort of crises that we had coming, and they brought in their mandatory pension schemes decades ago, and they've reversed their fortunes. So we're a little behind that. The UK as well have done that, but it's yet to be seen how successful theirs is going to be. And we're probably more successful than the States.
Okay, so given that we're at a stage in the construction industry where there's certainly a lot of indicators saying that we've reached a peak, and so therefore we might be facing into the downward part of a cycle now. How is that going to affect? How is that going to affect getting members engaged in this?
I suppose on our side of the house, we don't have any daily sort of working in that area. So what we're trying to do is just get people to pay attention to their pensions, to engage with their scheme, whatever scheme that they're in, and to look after it. When it comes to whether peaks and troughs of the sector, it's more about save now. You can pause it if you need to, but we don't get involved in that side of things in that.
Okay, and what about for you, Natalie? Over the next number of, I suppose, I presume you've a plan over the next kind of 12 to 18 months.
I do, yeah, but hopefully things will keep going really well for the next 12 to 18 months at least. Don't have my crystal ball with me today, so I can't see that far.
None of our guests appear to have both their crystal balls.
Just speculate for a moment, because you're the two, you're in the pension area. There's much talk, as we know, down the years, of governments insisting that employees have pensions and legally speaking have pensions as well.
That's the mandatory.
The auto-enrolment, yeah.
The auto-enrolment is the idea is that you force people, it's self-mandatory, so it's opt-out. And the reason is obviously inertia is a great thing, so you opt everybody in and hopefully they don't opt out. When you consider the sustainability of the current state level of state pension,
with the 60%,
exactly, it's nearly irrelevant whether they force you to or not. You kind of have to.
Yeah. So you think it's more or less coming?
It's an inevitability.
Okay, that was Natalie Ryan, Business Development Coordinator of CPAS, and Susan O'Mara, Financial Service Consultant, Milestone Advisory. Thanks for coming in to us
Thanks
today.
for having us.
Thank you.
And we want to thank all our guests for joining us here today. Also thanks to Shane Flynn, who was on sound, and producer Katie Tallon. We're back at the same time next week, so stay tuned for Bowl of Soul, which is coming up next. From Brian Fox, myself, and Carol Tallon, have a good week.